In 1536, Francis I, the Catholic King of France, signed a diplomatic treaty that aligned his nation with a Muslim state to coordinate military campaigns against the Holy Roman Emperor. The blowback across Europe was immediate. Pope Clement VII reportedly called the agreement the most scandalous thing in the world. Protestant reformers and Catholic monarchs alike condemned it. Francis had just spent a year as a prisoner of the Habsburgs. Surrounded on three sides and facing complete geographic encirclement, he reached out to the only ruler capable of dividing his enemy's military attention. Geopolitical survival required him to put military realities ahead of theological differences. The ruler he turned to was Sultan Suleiman I. By the time this alliance was struck, Suleiman commanded the most powerful state on earth, governing 25 million people across 3 continents. For a 16th-century European monarch, ignoring Ottoman power was an excellent way to lose a kingdom. The French king recognized what the rest of the continent would soon learn by force. Taking the throne at age 25, Suleiman immediately set out to prove his military credentials. Looking at this map of Eastern Europe, you can see how his armies struck north in 1521, capturing Belgrade, the heavily fortified barrier city on the Danube that had blocked Ottoman expansion for decades. The very next year, he pivoted to the Mediterranean. He launched a massive siege against the island fortress of Rhodes, forcing the surrender of the Knights Hospitaller and securing the eastern sea lanes. Then came August 29, 1526, at a field called Mohacs. In a battle lasting roughly 2 hours, the Ottomans dismantled the medieval Hungarian army, killing King Louis II and dismantling a state that had been a major European power for 6 centuries. Projecting force simultaneously across land and sea forced the Habsburgs into a multi-generational defensive posture on their eastern frontier, constantly anticipating where the Ottoman war machine would strike next. 3 years after crushing Hungary, Suleiman marched his army toward Vienna. Taking the Habsburg capital would settle control of Central Europe and remove any remaining resistance to his territorial claims. But the sheer distance from Istanbul worked against him. The long march through torrential rains depleted his forces and forced him to abandon his heavy siege artillery in the mud. By October, facing stiff resistance from the Austrian garrison and the arrival of winter, Suleiman withdrew. Vienna did not fall. Yet the sight of an Ottoman army encamped outside the gates of Austria terrified Western Europe, cementing a legacy that earned him the title, Suleiman the Magnificent. While Europeans defined him by the existential military threat he posed, his own subjects did not call him the Magnificent. To the millions living inside his borders, he was known as Kanuni, the Lawgiver. Administering the Ottoman state was a problem of staggering complexity. The empire encompassed populations of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, spread across territories that had previously been governed by Roman law, Islamic jurisprudence, and regional Balkan customs. Working closely with his chief judicial official, Suleiman solved this by harmonizing religious law, or Sharia, with sultanic law, or Kanun, weaving them into a single, cohesive legal framework. This new code standardized taxation across the provinces. It established strict protections for tenant farmers against exploitation, and instituted severe checks to ensure local aristocrats could not use their positions for personal gain. This predictable, unified legal system provided the economic stability and administrative efficiency required to sustain a global war machine for 46 years. To translate the empire's vast wealth into an enduring physical legacy, Suleiman relied on his chief imperial architect, Mimar Sinan, who would go on to design hundreds of structures across the Ottoman world. His defining commission was the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. Completed in 1558, it was designed as a direct structural and symbolic response to the ancient Byzantine Hagia Sophia, matching its vast interior spaces and dominating the city skyline. These architectural miracles functioned as highly effective soft power. They engineered a cultural gravity that communicated Ottoman supremacy just as clearly as any military victory. Despite this projection of absolute strength, Suleiman harbored deep personal vulnerabilities. Breaking 2 centuries of Ottoman tradition, he formally married his concubine, Hürrem Sultan. While commanding armies in the field, the conqueror of Belgrade frequently sent her deeply intimate, highly vulnerable love poetry. Yet this capacity for intimacy existed alongside cold brutality. In 1536, Suleiman ordered the sudden execution of his Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, a man who had been his closest personal friend since childhood. Ibrahim had accumulated immense personal wealth, adopted royal titles inappropriate for his station, and began operating with an arrogance that directly threatened the strict legal hierarchy Suleiman had spent his reign constructing. Maintaining a sprawling empire requires a monarch to subordinate personal attachments to the rigid laws of the state. To protect the system he built, the lawgiver had to prove that no one, not even his oldest friend, was exempt from its reach. Suleiman died as he had lived, in a military tent. In 1566, at the age of 71, he succumbed to illness during the grueling siege of Szigetvar in western Hungary. Recognizing that news of his passing could trigger a collapse in military morale, the Grand Vizier concealed the Sultan's death for 3 full weeks. The siege continued while the transition of power to his son was quietly secured back in Istanbul. The fact that an empire could wage a major war on a distant frontier for weeks without a living leader illustrates the sheer resilience of the bureaucratic bedrock Suleiman left behind. As this map of his border shows, after 46-year reign, Suleiman left behind a state that governed significant portions of Europe, Asia, and Africa. In the 16th century, the undisputed center of global geopolitical gravity was Istanbul. History records two distinct versions of his rule. To outsiders looking in, he was the terrifying conqueror pushing relentlessly against the borders of Christendom. But to those inside, he was the meticulous architect of fairness and order. The complexity and justice of the civilization Suleiman built behind his expanding borders outlasted his military conquests, defining the Ottoman political tradition at its peak.